Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? Thrilled to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, first of all, the project that I'm going to be focused on is 2100 Penn, and it is a project in Washington, D.C. But before I talk about that, I think it'd be good to talk a little bit about some of the projects that are preceding this, and some of the ideas that are embodied in these projects, because I think they share some of the same DNA that 2100 Penn is emerging with. This idea of receiving forms and projecting forms, and also materiality, this balancing between transparency and opacity. And this is definitely true in this project, which is a business school, where it's meant to be transparent as business should be, but also that it has these opportunities for intimacy and for collection, as in this 300-seat auditorium. In the case of the Commons, it's the opposite. It's meant to be reaching out and extending, very much like Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie Homes, because this is actually in the same context. This is in Illinois, where everything is we say, flat as a pancake. Oops. The next project, which again deals with this idea of formal balancing between receiving forms and projected forms, is in Manhattan, and this is the Visionaire. And this particular project is a mixed use. It's both a residential tower, and also it houses the facilities for the Parks Conservancy, which is a group that takes care of many of the parks in Lower Manhattan. And so we went through this evolution of a form from what was mandated to something that was more of an expressive form of this projection. So again, the receiving at the ground level of the lobby, and then projection at the top of the building. And this building, it reaches out into the New York City harbor. So there's a great opportunity and to some extent a responsibility to acknowledge that and to take advantage of that. Also in Manhattan, another residential building, another mixed-use building, in this case balancing between the materiality of the vision glass and, in this case, precast concrete, also to distinguish between the functionality of the base, which houses doctors' offices, and it needs to be more intimate, and then as you rise up, the residential tower. And then the lobby, which again is this receiving room, and has some of the same play of these undulating forms, but a little bit more figurative, and also with the materiality of the wood. Another building, in this case in Manhattan, in the heart of Manhattan, in the area that is where the Chrysler Building is, and also the Waldorf Astoria. This is an area where there's a great amount of New York deco, the Art Deco of New York City. So a lot of this has to do with the shimmering of 100 years ago, and the idea of the deco with faceted forms, play of light, elongation, and all of this was part on this very tight site to play up this through the materiality and through the expression of that, even again on the interior. So you could start to see there's this theme of echoing the exterior with the interior, and I think this is an important fact or an important aspect that permeates in 2100 Penn, which you'll see in a moment. And then the last example before talking about 2100 Penn is a new gateway for the World Financial Center, which is now known as Brookfield Place. And what's interesting about this is that it replaces what used to be a bridge that came across a highway, and this was really an opportunity to create a gateway where before it was just a very narrow passageway or almost like a tunnel. These escalators take you down below grade and to the World Trade Center site and also the Port Authority Transit Hub. And here you see it as it's presented from the Battery Park City point of view. So, talking about 2100 Penn, first of all, it's a project in Washington, D.C., and it is on the north side of the George Washington University campus. Here you can see it outlined, and it's also located on Pennsylvania Avenue, which is an important distinction that I'll point out in a moment. This corner of 21st and Pennsylvania Avenue was diagrammed very early on as a moment for really a landmark for the college. And in our neighborhood, close to where we work, we have the Flatiron Building. Now, we don't have in Washington D.C. There's a limit to the heights of the buildings. So a better example I found for a couple of reasons was looking at Gaudi's Casa Milà. And to me, there are a number of things about this as a precedent. One is the idea that working off of Cerdà's city plan, where the city blocks are truncated on the corner, there's this opportunity for, as Gaudi took advantage of, this opportunity for the undulation of the facade. So you have these projected forms and you have these receiving forms. The other thing that I want to point out, besides the formal aspect, is the historical aspect of this site. Pennsylvania Avenue, this is the site up here. Pennsylvania Avenue cuts through the White House and the Capitol. And that's important because when L'Enfant put the city plan together, there was a lot of debate about whether Washington, D.C. should even be the capital for the United States. A lot of people felt that Philadelphia should be the capital. So Thomas Jefferson, as the quintessential diplomat, said, why don't we call the main avenue Pennsylvania Avenue as a nod so that the capital will be on Pennsylvania Avenue, not necessarily Pennsylvania, the state. What I thought was interesting, I have a lot of family from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I've always been fascinated by the naming of these places. In the case of Pennsylvania, it's named Pennsylvania because it's honoring the father of William Penn, who wanted to name this whole wooded area the Woods of Penn, or Pennsylvania, so it's Sylvania. And what's interesting about that is if you combine this idea of the undulating facade with this idea of a wood, it became an underlying theme as we worked on this project, which could be described as waving woods. And this is articulated in a textured waving surface on the exterior that then folds into the interior, which you'll see in a moment. So this is taking that same idea of that very important corner, and again, having it as a projection, but also having it as an embrace, having it as something that it's a receiver with this undulation. And one of the things that I'll point out is how this then folds in to the entry. When we presented this to the city, it was very interesting. There are great opportunities that emerge for architects if we're willing to embrace them. When we presented this to the city had a lot of architects on the review committee, and they said, okay, you're saying that you're going to have this curving facade. Are you going to do that in glass? And we said, yes, we'll do that in glass. And they said, well, you're not going to change them and do flat pieces of glass later. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. And they said, okay, so we want you to make a drawing that calls out all the areas that are going to have curved glass. And we had already told them, we said, all the corners, all of these projected areas, the main entrance. So we had, this diagram actually is a memory of that agreement with the city. The other thing that emerged was because of the two streets, Pennsylvania Avenue and I Street, and this is that truncated edge, it's really a U-shaped building with an atrium or courtyard space. This is the first floor and the second floor, and the idea was to flow that form into this space, which you'll see in a moment. In order to understand this ourselves and then to explain it to the client, we actually built the inside out. So we basically built this kind of jelly form. We had it on the computer, but it was very hard for people to understand that we were talking about this almost as an object. So in a way, it comes back to the Savoy vase from Alvar Aalto with those undulating forms. And this is important because the idea was that the facade of the exterior would become the facade of the interior, kind of inside out, almost like a donut. Here you get a better idea of how the section works. This is the main entrance off of 21st and Pennsylvania Avenue, and then it rises up on this grand stair to the atrium space. That transformation that I was telling you about in some of those other projects of the exterior materials into these wooded materials is also the case here. So I guess there's a lot of talk today about Finnish architects. Our firm actually comes out of Saarinen as well. I'm a huge fan of Aalto, and this has always been a very fascinating image to me. This is of the pavilion that Aalto designed for the 1939 World's Fair. And this became an inspiration for how we started to articulate the atrium as well as the lobby coming into that atrium space. Again, with this idea of the wood as kind of the heart of the project. The geometry of the site, the history of the site, all became informatives of the project from all surfaces. Not only the walls, not only the floor, but also the ceiling of the atrium and the ceiling of the lobby itself. These are some photos of it now under construction on the interior, and you could see that the glass, this is actually a combination of mirrored glass and also vision glass. And a very important part of this transaction between the entry and the atrium is this grand stair that's almost like a brook, like a brook that's been carved, a brook of stone that's been carved over time by water. And so this is part of the experience so that it's not just a visual experience, it's not just a planar experience, but it's one that you can flow through the space. And here you see the concept of it, and what became important was to really find the right stone to depict this. We wanted a stone that had, like a stone in a brook, sometimes when it's drying in the sunlight, it becomes very bright and very light. But sometimes when the water hits it, it becomes very deep, and it has that combination to it. So I went to the center of Turkey, to Sivas, to this particular quarry, because I was interested in this stone called dark olive, and it became a very important anchor for the project. This was also in Turkey. The fabricator was in Turkey, and this was a dry lay of the paving, which had that same quality I was talking about. Very light, but also these areas that are high-honed or polished. So you have this kind of sparkle, almost like the water and when it's hitting the stone. And here you can see the dry lay. We did the dry lay not just as a flat, but also in the completely looking at all of these stones so that we could actually look at them and move them around. This became very important. Full disclosure, I'm a sculptor, and the tactility of architecture is always something that's been very important to me. And this is something we always specify in our drawings, is to have these types of reviews with the fabricators. Here is that same stair installed. Here you can see it in the context of that space. And this is as it's rising up from the lobby up into the atrium space. And this is in the atrium. And here you can see this is actually an interior space, but it's an interior space that has the quality of the outside. And you can see some of the wood being installed up here and also going along on the spandrel areas. And then culminating on this west wall, which is actually an interesting result of a requirement that we had to address. It became a great opportunity. We had to create a setback at this particular part of the building because of an easement, a 20-foot easement, and we were given this as a starting point. The concern was there would be too much of a large element casting a shadow in the atrium. So we looked at a number of different ways of transitioning from this plane to this plane, and we looked at a lot of the geometry that we were developing around the perimeter of the building, and came up with this idea of a switchback for the facade. And it became a great opportunity for the structure to have these triangulated trusses. Here you could see it as it's being installed on the curtain wall, and then wrapping around. And you can see here with the curtain wall in place, some of those projections on that facade. Another aspect that we were given with that was something we had to respond to was the setbacks. There's a 12-foot difference between the south street and the north street. North Street being the Pennsylvania Avenue, and we had a limit on how high the building could be, and then the setbacks set that in motion. So those became opportunities for a change in scale at the skyline, but also again coming to this idea of these projections could occur not just on the corners, not just at the entry, but also along the facade. And here you see the development of the facade. And then here you can see this concave and convex undulation. All of our bays are all going in the same direction around the building. Here you see it at the entrance, around the corners. Very important element to this, in addition to the stone and the wood on the interior, was the glass on the exterior. And we had to go through a very extensive search to find a good glass manufacturer. We ended up using 3 different glass manufacturers for the flat glass, the concave glass, and the convex glass. It's not uncommon to have this curving glass in 2 directions, but to have it on insulated glass is very difficult because this is a low E or low emissivity coating, and you get these different colors that occur if the coatings are not working in tandem with each other. And so we ended up going with, as I said, 3 different manufacturers to do the concave, the convex, and the flat. Here you see the panel before it's being prepared. And one thing to note, we also played with, at a smaller scale, that same undulation with terracotta. So we went through a study looking at the different possibilities of finish, glazing, and shape with that undulation. This is the installation of the curtain wall. And this is pretty much the state that it's in at the moment. and it should be complete in June of 2022, which is unfortunate because we were hoping it to be complete in 21 with the 2100 as the date of the project. But nonetheless, we're very excited about it. And I really appreciate the time all of you have given for listening about this.